Cool. So we are going to be going through a book called Drig Drsya Viveka. It comes under a tradition called Advaita Vedanta. And Advaita Vedanta is, so what does Advaita Vedanta even mean? So the literal translation of it is non-dual Vedanta. And Vedanta specifically is a part of the Vedas, which are these old manuscripts written, probably like 4,000 years ago, or maybe even 5,000 years ago. And they contained knowledge about all of the discoveries and experiments that people did and their findings, and they documented it in this large collection of works called the Vedas. And you can find all kinds of information. So things like medicine, fashion, art, theater, all kinds of arts and sciences. And then at the end of the book, there are specific topics which are discussed. Typically, they are classified into three major questions, which is, who am I? What is the nature of this world? And how does it come about? And these questions have been organized in these books called the Upanishads. And they are typically at the end of the Vedas. There are four major Vedas. You don't have to know all of this, but there's four different Vedas. They all come from different ages, you could say, different periods of time. And Upanishads are the concluding portions of the Vedas. And which is why this work is called Vedanta, because Anta means the end. So it's physically, the location of the text is towards the end. And subtle distinction is that it is the knowledge that ends all knowledge. So, we are all seekers. We are all seeking something, right? We are all trying to gain fulfillment. We're trying to feel complete. And this knowledge is that which will end that seeking. So that's like the subtler aspect of what Vedanta means. So we are studying Advaita Vedanta. So it's a specific form of Vedanta, you could say, or an interpretation. That means that there are other kinds of Vedanta that people can study. But we are studying a very specific interpretation. And Advaita means non-dual. And what is non-dual? Because we hear this word thrown about a lot, like non-dual. We hear of unity. Why don't we say unity? Why do we say non-dual? If everything is one, why don't we just say unity, like unity Vedanta? And the reason we don't say that is because our experience of this world is that there are many things, right? Like I feel like I'm a separate person. There's this world, there's all these people, there are all these objects. So our experience of the world is that there's many things. But the fact is that it is not two. So non-dual is essentially acknowledging our experience and saying that, yes, there are many things, there are different objects, there's diversity in the world, but actually what it is that it's not two. So cool. So that's sort of the path that we're going to go down, and all of this comes under this broader sort of form called yoga, right? So yoga also means union. So that's the literal translation of yoga, and we are essentially studying yoga. Our typical understanding of yoga is that it's a bunch of physical exercises, but that's a very small section of what yoga is. Broadly, yoga is classified into four categories. There's the Raja Yoga tradition, which is what is mostly popular. There's a lot of breath work, energy work, asanas. It's a highly sort of disciplined path where you have to follow certain rules and rituals, eat in a certain way, think in a certain way, be highly moralistic. It's very organized, and it's called Raja Yoga particularly because Raja translates to a king, and it's usually for people who are seeking to be kings or like powerful people. So you want to gain mastery over your body, become a highly successful person, be powerful, gain like siddhis, they're called, which are special supernatural abilities, maybe reading people's minds, being able to predict the future, having sort of like this connection to like a different realm and different dimension. So all of those things are consequences when you kind of go deep into yoga. They may or may not happen, but in the world of Raja Yoga, those are likelier to happen because it focuses on the energy work. And then, so it's also, suited for certain kinds of people, right? So like the great thing about yoga is it's got a diverse set of practices. So Raja Yoga offers a few. The next one is, the most common form that you find across the world, which is Bhakti Yoga, which is the form of devotion. The tradition where you are, singing the praises of the God, of the Lord and the divine, going to the temples and churches and mosques and praying. And what you're doing there is you are letting go of your own ego. And because you're dropping your own ego, you're having this connection outside of just your limited ego. So, and it's usually for people who have a sort of highly developed emotional nature, because you can use an emotion to feel connected with the divine. So that's the Bhakti Yoga tradition. There is the Karma Yoga tradition, which is the yoga of action, which is how do I act in a way, and how do I perform actions in a way that can lead to the divine. And you will find people like Mother Teresa, maybe Mahatma Gandhi, all these people who did a lot of work and did work to sort of transcend their own, like, I would say, limited desires and do desires for like society and like the larger. And so you're doing the same thing, but through actions, which is dropping your own sort of puny ideas and desires and seeking the divine through your actions. So that's like for people who are highly who want to work a lot, who cannot like sit still, who cannot meditate, right? Like, and they want to do actions. So how do I do my actions in a way that kind of dissolve my karma and I can reach the divine? So that's the Karma Yoga. And finally, it's the fourth one is Jnana Yoga. And that's the tradition that we are going to be studying. And Jnana Yoga literally translates to the yoga of knowledge, or you could say the yoga of insight. So we are reading and we are going to be studying the Upanishads and books like Drig Drsya Viveka, which we're going to be doing in this course. And what this does is that these are utterances or sayings which are direct experiences of people. This is not an hypothetical like idea or a thought. These are experiences which are being described by people. And what we do is that while we hear these experiences or while we hear these words, we are put into a state and experience the words ourselves. So we are hearing the words, we are trying to rationalize it and say, okay, intellectually this makes sense. And then once we have an intellectual understanding, there is a shift where the intellectual understanding and our direct experience has a small like contact. And we are like, okay, this is not just intellectually true, this is actually directly experienceable by myself. So the technical term for this is called Shabda Pramana, which is like, it's a means of knowledge through words. So the words itself are powerful, that they put us in an experience while we are hearing it. And that's the sort of beauty of this work, because it's a direct path where we directly put you in your, putting you in that place where you can experience yourself. Okay, so this is a lot that I have said, but all of this will make itself a little clear as we dig in to this work and start our study. Any thoughts or questions? Also, if you have any questions at any point, feel free to interrupt me. I'm happy to take any questions at any time. Okay, so let us get started. So I'm going to share my screen. So it's, I've been doing this in this way where I present the actual verses. Cool. So before we begin, we are going to do an invocation chant. And this is a tradition and not just like a random ritual, but essentially what we're doing is we're trying to invoke the divine in us so that this 90 minutes of study is most fruitful. We can pay most attention and the study is most effective. So, I'm going to chant this. If you want, you can join me, but, it's not necessary. And I'm going to read each of the lines twice. So, you can hear how it sounds the first time. And then if you want, you can join yourself where you are. So let's start. Asato ma sat gamaya. Asato ma sat gamaya. Tamaso ma jyotir gamaya. Tamaso ma jyotir gamaya. Mrityorma amritam gamaya. Mrityorma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So what does this mean? So the translation is, we want to go from untruth, lead me to truth. So we are, invoking the divine and asking the divine to move us from darkness and lead me to light, and move me from death and lead me to immortality. And Om, peace, peace, peace. So there's the sort of fact here that I am currently in a state of ignorance and darkness, and I want to move from that to light. So there is this acknowledgement. And then also, we are saying Om, peace 3 times. And that's also sort of a subtle reason why we say it 3 times is, in our experience in yoga, we define our experience in 3 layers. We have this physical experience where we are physically looking at the physical world, right? So we can say, let there be peace outside, so that, I'm not disturbed in my study. Then secondly, there's this internal sort of like, peace, which is closer to me, which is my body. So let my body be peaceful. It may not have pains and all these sort of difficulties and discomfort, so that I can sit comfortably and I can study. And then the third one is the mental peace, which is, may my mind be peaceful, so I don't have thoughts which are like distracting me, and I can focus on the study. So that's sort of the subtler reasons why we say peace 3 times. Okay, so I wanted to acknowledge my own teacher and the tradition that I come from. My teacher is Jim Gilman on the right side. He has studied Advaita Vedanta for the last 40 years under Swami Chinmayananda, but the one in the middle was his teacher. And he has studied from his teacher and their teacher, and it goes all the way down to Adi Shankara in 800. And Adi Shankara wasn't the first teacher. He had teachers, which goes on for like, nobody knows who was the first teacher. But this is a long lineage. I do acknowledge that there's a bunch of dudes here, but it is not just limited to males. There have been countless number of beings who have been men and women who have been realized. And this is a living tradition which continues even today. And there's something to say about a living tradition, which is that, there are people who say that, tradition is not needed. And that's probably true. It is not needed. You don't need to be in a particular tradition to get realized. But a tradition can help. And the reason is because the tradition has value in the fact that it has worked for thousands of people and for thousands of years, and maybe hundreds of thousands of people. And if somebody new comes up and says, I have this new process, I would be a little skeptical because I don't know if it actually works. It may have worked for one person, but I don't know if it'll work for everybody, right? So that's my sort of take on this. It doesn't necessarily have to be your take, but that's why I feel traditions are powerful, because we tend to keep things that work, and we tend to discard things that don't work. So things that have survived over time tend to be the ones that are good, and especially the esoteric stuff. So the Advaita Vedanta is fairly esoteric. It's not very popular. You don't find it very easy, accessible. Even if you go to India, if you talk about Advaita Vedanta, it's hardly anybody would know. I didn't hear about the Vedanta until I came to the US, which is kind of bonkers. If you think of like all good things in the world, like art, music, the most popular things are not really good, right? Like it's usually the esoteric and like the masterpieces, which most people don't necessarily know about. Okay, so thank you, Guruji, for all of the great work that you have done. All right, so we are going to start our study. So the name of the book is Drig Drsya Viveka, Discrimination Between the Seer and the Seen. So a little bit of context about this book. This book was written in the 14th century in this place called Sringeri in Karnataka. It is, Sringeri was one of the 4 mutts that were set up by Adi Shankara. And what is a mutt? It is a knowledge center. So Adi Shankara was born in like sometime around the 780 AD. He saw that Hinduism at the time, Hinduism wasn't a thing, but like Sanatana Dharma, or like the state of religion at India at the time, was extremely chaotic. And he came in, and the great thing about religion at the time was there was no concept of being associated to one thing. It was about what was the most effective way to reach realization or to reach the divine. That's what people cared about. And heads of different religions used to be able to have debates and arguments and public sort of competitions, and one person could beat the other person in this sort of public competition, and if that will be the case, all the followers of the person who lost would join and go to the other side. So the sort of religion was a very dynamic thing. It wasn't a static thing that I believe in this one thing. It's more like, oh, this is way better, let me do this, and you're always trying to find the best thing at the time. So Adi Shankara is a person who comes in, super brilliant, reads the Upanishads. Apparently he knew Sanskrit when he was 4, started chanting a bunch of things, started composing a bunch of poems when he was like 5 or something. Like, he's a super smart guy. And by the time he's 12, he's realized, and he starts walking all over India and starts to gain all these followers. And he writes a lot of books, writes commentaries on all the Upanishads. So not all of them, but the 12 of them. They're called the primary Upanishads. So there's totally 108 Upanishads, and 12 of them are called primary. And the reason they're called primary is because Adi Shankara wrote a commentary on it. So all of them have something beautiful to say, but 12 of them are considered important because Adi Shankara considered them important, and he wrote a commentary on those Upanishads. He distilled those Upanishads and created a bunch of works called the Prakarana Granthi, which they're called the works like Atma Bodha is one of them. Viveka Chudamani is another one. And what they do is that they lead you from being embodied, that I am a human being and I'm, suffering, to all the way to the highest truth, which is I am consciousness. So it is a step-by-step process. Before that, the Upanishads are, fairly cryptic, and you need a lot of like context to be able to understand it. And it's cryptic specifically for a reason, where this knowledge was esoteric. But Adi Shankara comes in and makes things more accessible to people, and he sort of transforms Indian society at the time. And he sets up these 4 knowledge centers. They're called the mutts. One in South India, one in the West, one in the East, and one in the North. He walked all over India and set these places up. So this was in 800 AD. And in 1400 AD, the head of the mutt, they were all called Shankaracharya. So if you hear the word Shankaracharya, it just means that they are the head teacher of a mutt. Adi Shankaracharya was the first one, the dude who is on the left here. But there are many Shankaracharyas, so you'll hear Shankaracharyas, there's a current Shankaracharya who exists today. So every 50 years, you'll find that there's a new Shankaracharya chosen. Okay, so this book was written in the 14th century by the Shankaracharya of Sringeri Mutt. Sringeri Mutt looks like this. I was fortunate enough to visit Sringeri Mutt in December of 2021. It is a beautiful place. If you ever get a chance to go there, you should. This is a temple that was constructed in the 14th century. It's marvelous architecture. The vibrations of this place are still amazing. I went during COVID, so things are a little slow there, but yeah, it's beautiful. And unfortunately, I felt that people in India do not understand what this place has to offer, but that's another conversation. All right, cool. Let's get into the book. So I guess before we do that, a little bit about Sanskrit. So we are going to be reading some Sanskrit. And the reason why we are going to read Sanskrit is because Sanskrit is a very powerful language. Sanskrit was designed to express the ideas of spirituality. That was the reason. There was other languages that existed at the time, people spoke them, but Sanskrit was specifically crafted to express these philosophical ideas. And the words in Sanskrit have a vibrational quality. That is not spoken about as much in Jnana Yoga, which is the yoga that we're studying. But if you look at Bhakti Yoga and Raja Yoga, there's mantras, there's sounds that you can use, root sounds that you can use that help you sort of reach higher states of consciousness. And they can be of huge value to some people to chant mantras, but it's not necessary. So we are going to be chanting them and chanting some of these verses. And the other cool thing about Sanskrit is that each word has a deep meaning. So, one word in Sanskrit could, if you were to define that word in English, it would take pages. You can write an essay on a word, right? So, and that's amazing because a single word can put you in an experience, because what the word is describing is an experience. And these are powerful ways to do our spiritual practice, because you don't have to have like hundreds of thoughts to understand a concept, but just a single word can do that. And that's a huge value of this work. And it's not necessary to know Sanskrit. We are going to read the Sanskrit, but it's not necessary to know. But it will be helpful to remember some words, because as we do this work, those words, you will find those words repeating quite often, and over time you will get familiar with those words. Okay, any thoughts or questions? What would I've said so far? Okay, cool. Let's get started. So verse 1. Rupam drishyam lochanam drik tadrisham drik tumanasam drishya drivratya yasyakshi drigeva natu drishyate. So the English, the form is perceived and the I is its perceiver. It, I, is perceived and the mind is its perceiver. The mind with its modifications is perceived, and the witness, the self, is verily the perceiver. But it, the witness, is not perceived by any other. Okay, so this is the first verse, and usually in these texts, the first verse contains the entirety of the teaching. So if you can understand the first verse, and you're like, cool, this makes sense to me, this is a direct experience, then you're done. You don't have to you don't have to go through the book. But if it doesn't, then no problem. The rest of the book is going to expand on the first verse, and it's going to become subtler and subtler. So this is the subtlest. Sorry, so the rest of the book is going to go slightly grosser and grosser. So it'll introduce certain concepts and parts that will help in understanding the first verse. So let's unpack this verse. So the first line, the form is perceived, and the I is its perceiver. So this is essentially describing somebody's experience, right? So they are talking about form, and the word we use for form is rupam, which is, everything in this world has a form. So if you look at the physical stuff that you're seeing with your eye, the tree outside, the house, the wall, the table that you're looking at, maybe the chair, all of those have a form, and it's being perceived by something. And in this case, it is the eye. So if you don't have an eye, for example, you will not be able to perceive the physical sort of form that the eye presents to you. So there's always a subject-object relationship with the I and the form, right? So the I is the subject and the form is the objects, right? So does that make sense to everybody, right? So the I is the cause of seeing images of the world. So the world is perceived through the eye. So now you can go one level subtler and say that the I itself is perceived and the mind is its perceiver, which means that, let's say my vision was a little blurry, or it was sharp, or if I'm wearing some sort of glasses, sunglasses, which are a different color, all of those things are perceived. And then the mind is making an observation about it and saying, oh yeah, my eye is sharp, maybe it's it needs glasses, or the color of my glasses right now is green, so the world looks green, right? So all of those things are observations that the mind makes. The eye is just giving me information, which is information in the form of light is coming through. But then the mind is looking at those things, at those visuals, and then making observations about what is being observed. So, I could be looking at a tree, but if a person has never seen a tree, they would not understand what it is, right? So sometimes you go and see something completely new, the mind kind of stops because it's I don't know what this is, right? So only through memory and through previous experiences, the mind can sort of form opinions about what is being perceived by the eye. Right? So the mind itself, which basically here the word we use for mind is manasam, which is interesting. The Sanskrit is manas, and the word is that's where we get the word man from, and we get the word mind from. All of those have the same root of manas. So human is also comes from manas, for example, and woman, interestingly, is a man with a womb. So it's a womb man. So these are all interesting, etymology of words. So the mind is the way we define the mind in the Vedanta is thoughts and memory, and essentially this sort of field of memory which causes thoughts to arise. So we can see that thoughts appear, right? So if I ask you to think about what you ate for breakfast this morning, or dinner dinner last night, you can see that thought arise, right? So if everyone take a moment, think about what you ate last night for dinner. Think about your plate, think about what was on it, what it tasted like. So right now, your mind presented that plate, right? Like the actual color, the stuff on it, right? So this is appearing. So what was this perceived by? It was perceived by the witness, which is basically, there is a sense of awareness that is underlying all of our experiences, which illumines the thoughts, the feelings, all of those things. So like, the plate, you're able to witness the plate. So there is something called the self, which is a new term being introduced here, but let's put that on the shelf for now. But there is this witness, you can say, that is even seeing the thought. So, the thought of the plate, the thought of the food, that is being witnessed by something. We call it the perceiver. So these are just words we can use to associate to our experience, right? So our experience is that I'm experiencing the thought of the plate. And who is this thing that's experiencing it? We are calling it the witness, or the self. Now and then it's making a huge claim in the end and saying that the witness is not perceived by any other, which means that the witness is the end. You cannot have ad infinitum and keep going back and saying somebody observes the witness and the witness is observed by the witness and keep going back. There is an end. And I can prove this to you. So if you wake up in the morning and someone were to ask you, do you exist? What would you say? Would you say you exist? Would you say you don't exist? Or let me phrase it another way. Do you ever doubt that you exist? Probably not, right? You may doubt whether you are dreaming or whether you're not dreaming, right? Like that may be a doubt. But the fact that you exist is never a doubt. You are even in the most, I would say, miserable state or the most ecstatic state, the experience of being or existing is always true. It's never absent, right? So the word we use to describe that is that the self is self-luminous, which means that it needs nothing else to illuminate itself. So if I were to ask you, are you you? What would you say? You would say, yes, I am me, right? I do exist. I am. But what I am may be a separate question, but I never doubt that I exist. I can doubt that I am, maybe happy or sad or, unwell. I can have those sorts of questions, but the basis of everything is that I am first, right? I'm existing. I'm a conscious being. On top of that, I can have these other thoughts about my mind and my body and say, I'm feeling sick, I am feeling hungry, I'm feeling energetic, I'm feeling tired. Those are all attributes that I'm assigning to what I am seeing, which is my body or my mind. But the basis is that there is this witness, which is always shining, and it's illuminating my experience. So if this doesn't make sense right now, just put it on the shelf. This is the first verse, and as I said, that this is the sort of entirety of the teaching. If this makes sense, then you don't need to be in this class. But we will get into what this means. But what you want to take away from this verse is that our entire experience of this world has a subject and an object. I am the subject, and the world of objects, in the form of like external objects, like the book, the tree, the lamp, the window, they are all objects. And there is a subject that is perceiving these objects. There is a subject-object relationship. And this is true. You can verify it by yourself. Do this, over the next few days, and come back to me next week and tell me if there was a situation where that was not true. And this is, you got to be scientific about, all of the ideas that you're going to be getting in this class. It's like, be a spiritual scientist and see if this is true for you. If it is not true, then remove it. If it is true, accept it. That's the way we want to like do this work. It's not some sort of like belief or faith, just because somebody else has said this, it is true. Absolutely not. Be skeptical and see if this is true or not. So, so the form is perceived and the I is the perceiver. So there's a subject and object relationship. Okay, any thoughts about this? I'm going to move on to the next verse, if not.
Hi, Praneeth.
Yes.
Quick question. Have you or anyone ever come across and the experience of like, there's the observer, the witness, and then observing the observer? I don't, I've had that in my journey, and then I get confused a little bit.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to share that and see how to navigate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would say that if you are having a thought that, oh, I'm an observer right now, that's not the observer. That's a thought about the observer. The observer has no thought. It is just observing itself. So like right now, I'm looking at the screen, right? Now I can have a thought while looking at the screen and say, oh, I am an observer right now. But that thought is not the observer. The observer is the one that is looking, and that has no thought. You cannot describe that because that is the subject, if that makes sense. You can only describe an object. The unfortunate part about the self, or this work is that, our usual learning tends to happen using comparing and contrasting, which means that, when I want to learn about what does, a mango look like, for example, I can look at a mango and be like, oh, it's, yellow and it's juicy and, it looks like this. So tomorrow when I were to identify it, and I'm walking on the road and I see a tree and I see a similar shape on it, I'm like, that's a mango, because I know what it looks like. And when it's not in my experience, I know that the mango is absent. So I'm comparing the experience of not having that and comparing the experience of having that in my awareness. And I'm saying, this is a mango. So just to make that a little bit more concrete, if somebody who has never seen a phone, and I tell them that this is a phone, this is the presence of a phone, this is the absence of a phone. So whenever somebody sees this, they're going to be like, phone. That's how kids learn, right? Like small kids, they have never seen something like this. But then when it's not there, they'll be like, oh, there's no phone. But then when it's there, they're going to be like, phone. So that's like sort of the comparing and contrasting of something that exists. Now, the problem with the self is that it's always on. There's no off switch. You can never not be yourself, right? You're always on, you're always awareing, you're always perceiving. You may be sleeping and perceiving a dream. You may be awake, you're perceiving this. You may be dreaming while you're awake, right? Perceiving some random thoughts, but you're always on. So you will never learn about yourself through our normal means of learning, which is by comparing and contrasting. So because the self is not an object, it is the subject. Everything that you can have a thought about, everything that you can see, everything that you can sort of know in the form, like through your senses, is not the self. That's sort of the paradox here. Even though it's not perceivable, you can say in quotes, it is still experienceable. Because I can ask you, are you you? You're going to be like, yes, I am me. How do you know? How do you know that you exist? Do you need somebody to prove to you that you exist today? No, right? Because I don't know how I exist, but the fact is I do exist. Like that's my direct experience. So that direct experience that I am, that is the self. On top of that, we can say, the self is like this, the self is like that, but all of those things are just descriptions and thoughts. So even the thought that I am the witness is not you. The one who is looking at that thought, I am the witness, is you. And that one who is looking has no words. It's just silent. The moment you utter any word, you have moved away from the self. Does that make sense, Lily?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so I would say don't get caught up in saying, is this the witness or is that the witness? Because you're never going to find the witness in that way. You will never have a point and say, in your meditation, let's say you're meditating and it's gotten really quiet. You're never going to be like, aha, I see the self, it's there. That's never going to happen. Because the self is the eternal subject. And the moment you have an experience or some sort of a, objective experience, you can say, maybe you're feeling pretty good, maybe you're feeling blissed out, maybe you're seeing some light, maybe you're feeling all sorts of vibrations in your body. All of those things are great, no doubt, but they're not the self. They are definitely helpful in our path where, as we get more and more deeper, we start to have all these different experiences, but they are not the self. The self is the one who is looking, and this is happening all the time. You are experiencing the self right now because you are the self. You are you. So if I were to ask you who's looking at the monitor right now or the screen, who is looking at it? What would you say?
I would say I am.
Yes, that pure witnessing or that pure looking is the self. By what means are you able to look and say, I'm looking at the screen? That pure awareness, that witnessing consciousness, you can say, is the self. And we will get into this. I know this is the first verse, so this will get clear. We will have more discussions on this over time. Cool. So let's move on. I know, we can talk about the self. We haven't even introduced the self, to be honest. We have just spoken about the witness, and but we will get there, Sydney, I promise you. Okay, let's do verse 2. Nilapita sthula sukshma hastavadirghar dibheda nana vidhani rupani pashyai lochana mekadha. The English. The forms, objects of perception, appear as various on account of such distinctions as blue, yellow, gross, subtle, short, long, etc. The eye, on the other hand, sees them, itself remaining one and the same. Okay, so this is describing, our experience of the world is, the fact that we see a bunch of different things. We see objects which are like, blue in color, yellow in color, of course, like various colors, infinite colors. We see objects which are of various forms, in terms of like massive mountains, a grain of sand, some star which is super far away, maybe like a speck of like hair which is in front of you, like all these different things. The eye is seeing all sorts of things which are like bright, things which are dark, but the eye itself never changes. It's unchanged from the perspective of what is being seen, right? It's untouched. So if I see a large mountain, or I see a tiny bacteria through a microscope, the eye never changes, right? The eye is, all it's doing is it's an instrument, and it's passing through, you can say, all of the information. The eye is untouched. And here there's this sort of subtle distinction, or this sort of similarity, where the self, which is this awareness, is illumining this entire world, and itself is untouched by anything. That's what the sort of parallel is here. And the reason why we see something as blue or yellow or subtle or short, long and small, is because of our memory. So we can say that the mind has all these impressions of the past. They're called samskaras in this work. So a samskara is essentially an impression that is experienced while we are awake and engaging with the world. So an example could be, the fact that you call a book is a samskara, which is, over time we have learned that something that looks like a book is called a book. So next time when I look at it, the word that will come to mind is a book. And we have these samskaras for everything. So some samskaras can have an actual word to it. Some samskaras can just be like a vibration, have a vibrational quality. And some samskaras are harmless. Some samskaras are quite deep, in the sense, like, if they have a very emotional quality to it. So you can think of like trauma, right? So traumas are certain like experiences which have left a huge impact on our energetic system. Because of that memory, like, something that reminds us of that memory can trigger the same response, right? So all these things are due to an impression. And these impressions are the ones that make us experience the world as blue, yellow, and make us like sense the world in the modern context, right? Based on all of our samskaras. So a person who is a newborn, like a newborn baby, will have almost no samskaras because they haven't really experienced anything. They're just going to be like, just observing the world with awe, because there's nothing that their mind is presenting and saying this is blue and this is yellow, and having them live in the world of thoughts. Like, adults, on the other hand, why are we so lost in our thoughts? Because we have absorbed all of these memories and samskaras, and our attention is grabbed by those thoughts and memories. And so we're living in the thought realm. Kids, on the other hand, are different because they haven't had so many samskaras yet. They are able to engage and be more present. That's been, if you look at kids, they're a lot more present than than grown-up humans. So coming back to this fact is that the eye, the instrument, is revealing to the mind all these different facts, but the eye itself is untouched. Like, it doesn't care whether it sees a big mountain or it sees a small piece of grass. It doesn't care. It just remains untouched. So that's sort of the subtle meaning here, is that there is a part of you that is unchanged, is untouched. There is a surface level of your experience, which is the body and the mind, that is changing all the time. We have different thoughts that are going on. We have different like sensations on the body that's going on. We have like emotions that are coming up, but there's at the surface level, it just seems like there's like all sorts of different things going on. But at the deep level, there is something that's unchanged. This awareness, this witnessing consciousness that is still, does not move, which is illumining all of your experiences, including your mind, including your body. And getting access to that is the goal of this work, which is how can we get access to this deep being within us, and not constantly pay attention to the stuff that's on the surface of our mind, which is, our experiences and sensations in the body. Because if you look at trying to control our mind and experiences, that's an impossible task. Like, you will never be able to control the external, and you'll never be able to control even the body. The body is change. The body is constantly moving. The mind is constantly changing. So instead of trying to control that, what this work is going to do is it's going to point us to something that is still. And because there is something that's still in our experience that's happening all the time, like, when are you not you? So it's making you look at something that's always been there. And just because it is so subtle, we have never had this sort of chance to look at it without, some great sort of grace of coming in contact with this, right? Like, so somebody telling us that, oh, this actually exists, look at it. Unless that happens, it's very rare for somebody to wake up one day and get access to this without help from somebody. So the fact that we are studying this and we have come in contact with the Vedanta is also considered a great luck and grace to be able to do this work. Okay, so coming back to this, so we are always trying to move our attention to something that is unchanging. And what we are trying to understand is that there's always a subject and an object, and the objects are changing and the objects are constantly moving. Objects are of different shapes and sizes, but the subject remains unchanged. And this is a fact that's true, not, at the level of the I and the world as well. The I remains unchanged and the world is changing. Any thoughts or questions about this one? Okay, let's do one more. Andhyam andhya patushveshu netra dharmeshu chaikadha sankalpyena manashotra vagadau jyotidamidam. So such characteristics of the eye as blindness, sharpness, or dullness, the mind is able to cognize because it is a unity. This also applies to whatever is perceived through the ear, skin, etc. Okay, so this is kind of continuing along the same thought, which is, the eye and the objects is like at one level. And then if you go a little bit subtler, the objects that are recognized by the mind through the eye. So the mind is essentially the instrument that's used to recognize the eye itself. So like the physical entity, that's the eye. Right now I can, I'm wearing glasses, so my eyes are clearly not 100% functioning. Like, I need glasses to be able to see. So that means that I can see that my eyes are not sharp, right? So by what instrument can I even observe that, right? So I need a mind that can basically tell me that, oh, right now my vision is not clear. So there is this sort of instrument behind the eye, which is subtler, which is able to cognize the world, cognize the stuff that the eye is perceiving. So just like how the eye and the physical objects had a subject and object relationship, now the thoughts of what the eye is presenting and the mind has a subject and object relationship. Does that make sense? So now we have moved one level subtler. So we were living in the world of the physical objects. but now the physical objects is gone, and now we are just in the head, you can say. And in the head space, all of the objects which are illumined by the eye are now in my headspace. Because technically, the physical objects appear outside, but most of my experience is happening internally, right? There's no way to prove that what you're seeing and what I am seeing is the same. We have just agreed that that is true, right? We have all come to an agreement to say, yes, the color of the sky is blue, but like your blue may be completely different than my blue. There's no way to prove that. We have just all come to an agreement that if something looks like that in my experience, and if something looks like that in your experience, we can agree and say, yes, it is blue. And that's true for, other beings in the world too. Like, insects, for example, like they see a very different sky and different colors. Like their experience of the world is very different because their instruments are different. Right. So that means that when I am perceiving the world, all of the world is actually within me. The eye is like reflecting light, and then it's, presenting an inverted image on the back of my eye. My brain is looking at that, and it's essentially building this sort of flipping the image and like recreating the world in my mind. So there is this mind that is essentially illumining, you could say, the objects of the physical world. So there's that sort of next level, or the next subtler dimension that is able to cognize the objects. And you can say this for all of our senses. So when you're hearing sounds, right? If we didn't have a mind, the sound wouldn't make any sense. It would just be sound. But because we have mind, because we have studied language, because we have had these sort of impressions from the past, sound coming through the ear is recognized and cognized by the mind. And those sounds actually become words, which leads to more words, right? In our mind, we can have thoughts about words. So if I utter the word sunshine, that's just a word. But in your mind, that sunshine can relate to heat, can relate to warmth. All these different thoughts can start to come in your head. And that's only because the mind is able to do that. Like that's its property. It's able to take input from the senses, and it's able to sort of form our understanding of what the input is. So what this verse is saying is that no matter what the input is, the mind remains unchanged. So the mind is sort of like has the same relationship to the thoughts as the eye has the relationship to the physical world. Does that make sense? Any thoughts about this? Okay, so we are at 9:04. I wanted to do, actually, I think maybe this is a good place to stop. I wanted to do about like a 20-minute meditation today. So we'll have some time to do that, and then about 5 minutes at the end for any thoughts or questions. So we're just getting started into this. So, there's a lot of concepts which are not going to, which are new. So obviously it's going to be a little difficult in the beginning, but I promise you it's going to get easier over time. We're going, and the Vedanta is extremely repetitive. We're going to go through the same concepts over and over. And things which don't make sense now are going to make sense in the future time, because that's how the mind sort of works. It assimilates these ideas in the beginning, they're new. And as we sort of simmer over them, our mind sort of starts to get a little quieter and quieter. And these concepts start to make a little bit more sense. One thing I guess I wanted to also talk about this verse is that we got introduced to this Sanskrit word called sankalpa, which is actually a very powerful word. And it's almost, you can say, there's no equivalent in the English language. some translations they talk about it's an intention, it's a wish, it's a will, it's a desire, you can say. So the flavor of it is that there is a force in the mind that wants to do something. So like the modern sort of like new agey stuff is like manifestation. We want to manifest things, right? So sankalpa is essentially having a clear mind, and in a clear mind you are creating a thought saying, okay, let's say you want to work on a project. In a clear mind you are imagining what that project is, how you're going to go about doing it, and you're creating this intention, or the sankalpa, you can say. And these sankalpas are in the subtlest form, are perceived in the mind, but as more and more energy gets formed in this particular sankalpa, it manifests and becomes a physical reality. So the most powerful mind is the mind that is the quiet mind, right? So if we want to create anything in this world, we need our mind to be quiet and stable and still, so that the sankalpa that comes out of it is the most powerful. And we will get into this in the next few verses as well. But that's just a word for you, sankalpa. And you will hear that in other yoga contexts as well. And cool. So, all right, so let's do a meditation. Any thoughts about anything we've said so far? Okay. So let me stop sharing my screen. So let's start by sitting in a comfortable position. Like if you are sitting, just notice that your head is resting gently on your shoulders. It's probably useful if you close your eyes, but it's not necessary. You can leave them open too. And make sure your neck and your back is aligned and straight. If it's not, you can kind of just lean forward or backward just to make sure like your head is not straining your shoulders. You just feel comfortable. So let's start by taking a few deep breaths. And take long breaths to begin with. And you're just feeling your lungs expand. And you're exhaling and feeling the airs come out of your nostrils. Do that a few times. Maybe you can feel the sensations in your chest expanding. While you're doing that, just gently scan your body from the top of your head and just slowly move it down to the bottom, just to see if you're holding on to any tension this morning or any strain. If you are, maybe try breathing into a particular part of that body and see if you can release that strain on the exhale. So we're going to be introduced to a new kind of meditation. Some of you may have done this before, but it is what was described in the first verse, which is, subject-object discrimination, which is we are going to see in our meditation. We're going to take some conscious time and moments to see this, that in our experience, there's always this relationship, that there's a subject and then there's an object. So let's take a deep breath again. So while you're breathing, you can see that there is a breath, that is my object of perception, the breath. And I can say, and I can have this thought that I am breathing. So that means I have noticed that I am breathing, that I is the subject and the breath is an object. So the subject-object relationship is true when I'm breathing and when I'm noticing that I'm breathing. And this is happening all the time. We're breathing all the time. So at any moment, we can kind of come into this place where I can see that I am the subject and there is an object of breathing that's going on. So I'm going to go slightly subtler from a breathing to maybe a subtler sensation that may be happening in your body. So maybe notice the sensation of the chair against your back or against your thighs or your butt. And just notice that these sensations are happening. And again, the relationship is the same, that I am the subject and there is an experience. And I don't have to have a thought about this. It's just a fact, a direct experience that, yes, I am experiencing the sensations of the chair on my body. So I am the subject and the experience and the sensations is the object here. So I'm going to go one level even subtler. We're going to go into the realm of thoughts. So right now you may be thinking about what you want to eat or what you want to do after, or maybe thinking about something from the past. So if we consciously bring up image of a flower, the image of the flower is the object and I am the subject. The same subject is noticing the image of the flower. The same subject is also noticing the sensation of the chair. Same subject is also noticing you breathing right now. So the objects are varying, but the subject is the same. We can even explore the field of emotion. So think of a memory where you were feeling pretty happy. Maybe you were spending time with your family, spending time with your friend, maybe you're spending time by yourself. Just bring that emotion to mind. So that emotion is also experienced as an object. And the same subject is the one illuminating that emotion. So I see the emotion, I see this happy emotion that may be coming up for me. So if you find yourself, thinking and being lost in thoughts, that's totally fine, because even when those things are happening, there is a subject and object relationship that I am lost in my thoughts. So that fact that we want to observe here and take away from this is that there is this subject that's always on, no matter what you're doing. There is no point when the subject is off. And the subject is awareing. It is illuminating sensations, emotions, thoughts, feelings, breath. All of this is being revealed. So we want to get extremely familiar with this place, with this subject. And we want our mind and our attention essentially to be able to go to this place. So see if you can notice who is the one that is looking at the thoughts. It's a sort of awareness or this expansive consciousness, you can say. See if you can notice in this gap between one thought and the next, this space of consciousness. And in this space, all of my thoughts, emotions are experienced. So even if I'm noticing my breath, it is experienced in this space of awareness. So keep trying to turn your attention back. It's this reversal of attention. Instead of focusing on stuff, let's see if we can try to focus on where is this attention arising from. And not as trying to answer it with a thought, but just by looking, just by silent looking, just paying attention. And if you're having thoughts, that's fine. But just look at those thoughts too, silently. Keep turning your attention to that inward witness or that subject, not as a thought, but just looking at it. See if you can feel that space of consciousness, this expansive field of awareness. And in that awareness, you may have thoughts, feelings, sensations. That's okay. That expansive space is always there. That expansive space is you. And it's not felt or seen as an external substance. It is you. slowly, very slowly, you can bring your attention back to objective reality. And when you're ready, you may open your eyes. So we're going to end our meditation with another chant. And I'm going to do the same thing. I will read each line twice, and you can join me for the second line if you want. Yogarato va bhogarato va yogarato va bhogarato va sangarato va sangavihina sangarato va sangavihina Yasya brahmani ramate chittam Yasya brahmani ramate chittam Nandati nandati nandatyeva Nandati nandati Nandatyeva. And this is the translation, which is let one revel in yoga or let one revel in bhoga. So bhoga means living a very materialistic life, which is I want to fulfill all my material desires. Let one seek enjoyment in company or in solitude. She whose mind revels in the self, she enjoys, indeed only she enjoys. And this is a verse from this hymn called the Bhaja Govindam. It's the 19th verse of this hymn. And it's a beautiful hymn which talks about, about the highest knowledge. But essentially, this is the purpose and goal of the work, which is to realize yourself. And once you do that, it doesn't matter your place in life, whether you're a monk or a renunciate or a nun, celibate, or you're a king or a queen in any life situation, whether you're alone, whether you're with people, it doesn't matter, because you have found that place within where your mind can go. And if it can go there, it can revel in any situation. So the fruit of this work is it removes all fear. And once fear is gone, what is left is your own self nature, which is joyful and blissful in itself. And I hope that is a reality for all of us. Like that is what we are seeking. That is what we are doing. All of the desires that we have in this world has an underlying you can say a flavor, which is I hope this will give me happiness, right? That's why we are doing those things. And if we can find a way to be blissed out without anything, then we are free. Then it doesn't matter what the situation is. We can deal with whatever comes in the way that is needed to be dealt with. So yeah, so that's like the end of I think our I would say like class for today. I'd love to stay on for any questions or any other thoughts. And I would say homework. Typically, I don't like giving any homework or anything, but I would say please think about the essence of today's thing was there is a relationship, the subject-object relationship to every experience. There is this subject, unchanging subject that is experiencing this world all the time. Start to see that in ordinary situations. It doesn't necessarily have to be on the meditation seat. When you're grocery shopping, when you're cooking, when you're taking a shower, when you're pooping, like in all those situations, it's happening. It's just that we are so our habitual tendencies is to like think. But instead of being lost in thinking, focus on just paying attention. We want to build our capacity to pay attention, because that is the goal of this work, which is how do we increase our capacity to pay attention where we can be single pointed. So, we start to do things more efficiently in this world, because when we are single pointed, all of our attention is in our hands. We're doing the things in the most efficient way. And once we can do that, we can shift that attention in our meditation and pay attention to the subject. And if you can pay attention to the subject for a short amount of time, it will transform you, because you will realize that that is the core of your being and everything else is the surface. And for that, we need a little bit of effort, a little bit of practice, and a little bit of, I would say, dedication and discipline to be able to put in that effort. And I hope this, class and this group, we get to do that together. And, we are all on this path and this journey together. And yeah, I hope we can support each other in this way.